Today, we have with us Professor Jan-e-Alam Khaki, an educationist, an Islamic scholar, researcher, writer, columnist. One of his books has been published by Oxford University, and he has a PhD from the University of Toronto in Canada. Dr. Khaki, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure for having me. Thank you, Sahil.
Let's start by talking a bit about your life story and background. Can you share, your travels, your life experience in living in both the East and the West?
Sure, Sahil. My life has been interesting, between two extremes, from extreme rural to extreme urban. To start with, I was born in Hunza, northern areas of Pakistan, and in a small village called Aliabad. And the village and overall in Hunza, when I was born, around me, there was only one middle school, couple of primary schools in each village, and no girls' school. I'm talking about 1960s. I was born in 1960, and till around 1980, there were no girls' schools. So I was born in that kind of society, not because there was conservatism. I must make it very clear, in some parts of the world, because of conservatism, there are no girls' schools. But there was simply cultural and more financial. The government could not afford to open girls' schools. They could hardly open boys' schools. So I was, educated in a small village school, and then studied 3 to 4 villages away from my own village. I used to walk at least 4 to 5 kilometers, one way. And then I did my matriculation in a little bigger town, relatively, called Gilgit. And then I studied in Karachi and did my master's and B honors MA in the discipline of philosophy. And then for higher studies, went to London, where I did my master's at the University of London in education. And then studied for 3.5 years at the Institute of Islamic Studies, studying Islamic cultures and civilizations, teacher education, and what have you. And I also did Arabic studies at the Institute, and then went to Jordan for an immersion course and did some advanced Arabic at the University of Amman, Jordan. And then later on, I'll speak about the reason why I went for PhD. I did my PhD from Canada, as you rightly mentioned. And then, that's how I got an opportunity to study both in the developing countries and the Western countries. So I was very privileged, despite no sources. I studied up to the PhD level. So I always say, my life is a people-made life. So people have helped, institutions have helped, all sorts of people have helped to help me achieve to this level.
Let's speak a bit about your research, your writing, your books. What interests you? What topics in education are fascinating to you? Why do you write on some of the subjects you speak on, and for the magazines and publications you write on? What can you speak about? What do you write on? And
right. Let me say that I hurriedly gave my bird's eye view of my educational background, but somehow the life has made me quite interested in so many disciplines. As I said, starting with philosophy, I studied philosophy, Western as well as Eastern philosophy, for 6 years. And then, because of my educational background, I was immensely interested in education, providing teacher education, and then teacher trainers, developing teacher trainers. And particularly I focused in my PhD on leadership and management. So that was an area that it was and is an emerging discipline. Very few people have done their studies or PhDs in education, leadership, and management. I think probably I'm one of the pioneers who have done, PhDs in education, leadership, and management. So when I was working with the Aga Khan University's Institute for Educational Development, at that time I was the head of the faculty members who actually looked after this particular discipline, education, leadership, and management. And there, with around more than 10, university faculty, then I was privileged to be asked to start writing a project by editing a book on leadership. So over 10, 12 scholars, I think, contributed to that book. And I was the chief editor. With me, there was another scholar, Professor Qamar Sabdar. We both edited that book, and there were so many chapters from others, including our own chapters. So that was published in 2010. No sooner it was published than it got out of print because that was very much needed. We got lots of appreciation for the book from different professors, students, PhD students from overseas as well as within the country. And that then inspired me to start another project on the same theme, educational leadership.
Your new book,
management, yes. Policies and practices, voices from the developing countries. But fortunately, this time I was able to invite some other scholars from other countries as well. So they contributed chapters, and I hope that the book will be published before the end of this year.
Congratulations.
So thanks very much, and I hope to, we are 4 editors. With me, there are 3 other editors, and once it is published, we hope to launch, hopefully this year or early next year. So on the one hand, this is the area of educational leadership, but some of my other writings relate to very generally human life, and more specifically the nature of life, the problems of life, the challenges of life, and also the societal problems. For example, the relationship of religion and science, that interests me quite a bit. I recently completed one article for a newspaper. So I have been writing quite a few articles for one of the most prestigious newspapers, Dawn, the Daily Dawn in Pakistan, and I think I have completed the other day 39 articles so far.
Wow.
On different themes. These are some of my interests, and there are many titles that I'm still writing. I'm interested in writing about philosophy of happiness, for example, dealing with the nature of happiness, and not just books, but nature of happiness, issues of human happiness, and sources of human happiness across the cultures, not just from one particular perspective, but across the cultures, how people perceive happiness, challenges of life. And then I'm also interested, being even a grandfather now, and the issues that I particularly have focused is the children's issues. I consider myself a spokesperson for children. I personally feel that a lot of injustice is being done by parents, or very generally elders, not because they want to be unfair with children, but because they don't understand these creatures. It becomes difficult to understand these creatures that we call children. And then, we cause a lot of damage to them physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. So that has interested me a lot. With some of the colleagues, we have written another book on parents. I'm interested now to write a book on grandparents and their role in upbringing, both in the developed as well as in developing countries. I was asked by a college to speak about father's role, for example, in upbringing of children. So there are lots of practical human issues. I, for one, believe that our knowledge must help ourselves and other people in the societies to improve our world. So I have tried to use or make use of my knowledge, my experience, my professional learning as much as possible in solving human problems, in addressing human problems. So that has propelled my understanding. It's not just research for the sake of research, but making use of that research, that knowledge for the welfare or for the development of the society.
So, in these last 50 years, we've seen a lot of change happen in society, right? And we'll speak about some of these topics you mentioned. So we've seen a lot of change. We've seen a lot of different things happen. There's been, elements of secularism, elements of materialism, elements of fundamentalism, right? Many elements, have come together in different ways, and they've always been there. But we see, different elements come in. What are some of the implications of this change we see in the last, 50 years?
Yeah, very interesting. I compliment you for raising that question. I think both in developing countries and developed countries, this human knowledge explosion, the diversity of knowledge, if I were to say, has been on the one hand a great blessing and on the other a great challenge. Blessing because it has solved so many of our problems. Imagine, the GPS, how we are guided, how to drive on extremely complicated, cities and countries, computers, and other stuff. So it has increased our convenience, and they are truly great blessings. I call them sometimes miracles of human intelligence, So this has been great advantage. The other side of the issue of this particular development is, at least I'll focus on two things. One is, that it has very quickly displaced what we generally call the traditional wisdom, the traditional knowledge. It has undermined the traditional knowledge, what for centuries, we have had through books, the conventional wisdom. So all these pragmatic things which have made our lives easier, they have created a jaundiced view of the traditional learning. Because traditional learning was all about thinking, all about reflection, all about stories, poetry, mythology, and what have you, So these things have undermined all this traditional, what we call generally, quote unquote, traditional knowledge has undermined. Now, increasingly our children and grandchildren, find it extremely difficult to be interested on those kinds of. So there is what I call historic rupture between the traditional knowledge and the modern knowledge. So this never happened in history, because in the history, new generations always learned from past generations. They looked up for their life to learn something from the past generations and the past knowledge. Conversely, today, we don't look up to the traditional knowledge. We actually look down on that. For example, when we see debates about, the universe, the beauty, the poetry, and what have you, I say, what is this useless stuff, the very reading of the book has become problem
Mhm.
because of this different mediums through which we can listen to talks. We can watch movies rather than read a book about a particular war, for example, and things like that. So it is setting a different direction. So while, as I said, this is a great blessing that we have multitude of ways of learning, but the challenge is that it is disconnecting us from the past. So my grandchildren will have great difficulty, learning more about traditional knowledge, things that they have never seen even. They will not be able to see. For example, the traditional treadmill, hardly in their lives they will see a treadmill. And for example, a donkey, a horse. Many of the youngsters have never seen a horse, never seen a donkey, never seen a goat, a sheep. So that total traditional life, rural life, for example, is just going away from the new generations. So that will create a rupture, a distance, a gulf that will further lead to much more severing of, and challenges to generational gaps.
Mhm.
While previously, for example, I might have problems with my grandfather, not much with my father. Today, children will have great problems communicating with their own parents
Mhm.
because by the time children will grow up, they will be exposed so much to the modern knowledge. And I hear many, the other day, one child saying, my mother is stupid, my father is stupid. That never happened traditionally. For example, you always said, my father is the wisest man, in the town, or father or grandfather. But now this is no longer the case. So they look down upon the parents as being ignorant people.
Mhm.
You can imagine what kind of, again, a rupture between and among generations it's going to create. And what will happen to the relations, human relations. So, and there are many others. I can go on and on.
Sure, sure. Now, let's
Let's
focus on the youths, right? As you're mentioning in
Yes.
this case. Is what do you think they can learn from traditional knowledge, traditional values? Because a lot of them, there's some of the issues you're mentioning, they're very opposed to authority,
Yes.
very opposed to tradition in general,
Yes.
right? Opposed to loyalty, right?
Yes.
Opposed to sanctity in some sense,
Yes.
right? And so what can they learn from these things?
Absolutely. I think there are so many things I can talk about, but the prime being, for example, because of the nature of scientific knowledge, that it's very generally plain, horizontal for everybody to see. It's not convoluted. It's not layered.
Mhm.
Traditional knowledge, the sacred knowledge, for example, is all about hermeneutics, the art of interpretation. You see one thing and interpret it in so many ways, and you see a meaning behind a meaning, and then another meaning behind that meaning. So there are layers of meanings rather. The other day, somebody, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, forwarded me an attachment that's saying a paper in physics tells us that the world we are living in is unreal. It's you, probably, you sent me that paper or somebody else.
Mhm.
And it says that the world we are living in, and we ourselves are not real people.
Mhm.
These are shadows, or these are imaginary sort of existences. I am not surprised for this because I know Plato, 300 to 400 years before the Holy Christ had given an example of the cave, and told us that this world is not a real world. It's a world of images. As we see on a TV screen, on a movie screen, a picture going on, and we think these are real people, there. But today we know they are not real people. These are images.
Right.
Now, even a physicist in this case, I didn't read the entire article, I just browsed through the introduction. And they argue that these are appearances. And Plato has discussed about this nature
world
of
of
things,
appearances.
that these are appearances. There are so many things that appear like a bubble. Apparently, you have something right in front of you as a bubble. But no sooner you say this is a bubble, it's gone. It's no longer there. It's like shadows. It's like a dream. So many people in the past, including philosophers, mystics, have told us that we are not living in a real world. Now, why I say these things? When we talk about new generations, they will have great difficulty. They will have great difficulty appreciating these epistemologies. I mean, the sources of knowledge, the nature of knowledge, debating the nature of knowledge and what we see, what is and what could be, that distinction between what is apparently and what it really is. Debating these issues will be very difficult because we are being fed by just, superficialities. The world, the way we see the world, we think it is exactly like this. For example, I see a blue coat you are wearing. So for me, this is a blue coat. For many others, it's not a blue coat. Its color is not really blue, like the sky, for example. The sky looks blue, but there is no blue sky. This is just deception, illusion. So in order to discuss this, in order to appreciate this, you have to have a philosophical outlook to appreciate. Now, engaging the new generations with these kinds of debates and issues, I find personally, having interacted with the youngsters in the East and the West, is becoming increasingly difficult. Because science says 2 + 2 = 4. No? That's it. There is no mystery about it. There is no meaning behind it. It's just as plain as it is. H2O is water. So that's the scientific training, which is an extremely important training, extremely important discipline to understand the nature of our world, is very important. But if you were to apply this in psychology, if you were to apply this in aesthetics, and in other disciplines, hermeneutics, you cannot adopt a scientific approach. That's why I strongly argue for this, that we should not study religion the way we study science. We should not study science the way the way we study religion. The other day I wrote on these floods, in many parts of the world when there are floods, earthquakes, many people say this is God's wrath on humans because of their sins. I, for one, believe that this may not be the case. This may at least not always be the case. Things will happen on their own. The nature has its own way of behaving, not necessarily linked with human goodness or evil. So these things are becoming, quite complex. And as we move forward, particularly in the developed countries, I think new generations will have greater difficulty relating to their elder generations and the knowledge produced by the elders. And my worry is that they may consider all this, as something invalid, because science doesn't tell us this is the case. That is my problem. And I think that's not the right way to approach.
You spoke earlier about your interest in philosophy of happiness.
Yes.
Could you share your insights on, what we need to be happy and healthy?
Yes. My discovery in my own life about happiness, of course, informed by other sages and our other philosophers, who have talked about happiness, including Bertrand Russell and others. The greatest mystery that I have found about this in my life, which I would like to share with your audience, is that happiness never depends on the external circumstances. Happiness is something within. It's an interpretation, as simple as that. Happiness is not lying outside there. There is these glasses. I pick them up and internalize and I become happy. No, if I see these glasses as a source of happiness, then this is my interpretation. You don't see them that way. For example, some others don't see it. So happiness is not something that comes from outside. It's an interpretation you make out of it. Even if you are crying, even if you have problems, if you enjoy solving your own problems, you get joy and happiness. There are many people out there who cry even with the smallest problem. Hum badqismat hai, they would say, we are unlucky, we have these problems, these issues, and what have you. But there are many people who, in those very problems and challenges, draw happiness. So to me, happiness is an interpretation. It's the way you look at your problems, your blessings, your world around. How do you look at them? So I very often say, the problem is never a problem. It's the way you look at the problem is the problem. I repeat, the problem is never a problem in itself. It's the way you look at the problem is the biggest problem. If you say, this is not a big issue, I can solve it. There might be another person who might say, oh, I can't solve this problem, and keeps on crying. You will be surprised to know that I draw happiness when I cry. When I am sad, when I left my mother when she was alive to move away to cities, I would cry for hours, and that would be my greatest joys. So in crying, I used to draw happiness, So my whole outlook towards the world has changed. And definitely, I must say that I read this initially, I think 30, 40 years back from Dale Carnegie. I want to compliment him. He had written a book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living.
Right.
I read that book and the messages there were loud and clear. And he said, the problems are not there outside. The happiness or unhappiness is not there outside. It's the way you look at things. And that clicked in my mind. And since then, I have been reading and reading psychology of happiness. And there is a professor at Harvard who is conducting actually classes on happiness. The greatest number of students you can ever find in a class is his class. Lots of people are looking for happiness. It's an extremely interesting subject. And I think all of us should study what is about. Otherwise, we'll keep on running for happiness, outside in our material things, in our education, in our relations, in our wealth and what have you, in the cars and what. Do you think cars give happiness? Shame on us if a car gives us happiness, rather than, we're drawing some happiness from a more valuable thing, If a car gives, what does that mean? Because you give so much importance to a vehicle. You think if I have that particular vehicle, I'll be very excited, very happy. And how long can you have that car? Maybe one day it will, go away from you. So then you're unhappy. So happiness never depends externally on circumstances, but actually it depends on yourself within.
No, I agree. Let's shift to you. What is something you're, struggling with, or that challenges you, and you wish you could ask someone else this question?
Oh yeah, a lot, a lot. Let me make a very policy statement.
Mhm.
Our readers might be very surprised,
Mhm.
maybe happy to know about this. All the things, all the statements, and at the end of which there were full stops before. Now there are no commas or full stops at the end,
Mm.
but big mega question marks.
Mhm.
Let me explain. For example, I took for granted what this world is all about, what a tree is, you know, what a bird is, what a human is, what a woman is, what a man is, what a child is. Now, no longer. I fail to understand even a child. Who is a child? There's a big question mark. Who is a child? The greatest problem I saw in the world as a father, as a grandfather now, is to understand a child. It's so complex. A child is so complex, you know. So for all those who think a child is a stupid child, no, we always say child, bacha na bano. So don't be a child. Don't be childish. I think whoever has invented this word has done great justice to children. Be childish. If you study childism, childishness, you'll find amazing things. Because we do not understand children and their perspective, and we always watch them, understand them, and interpret their actions through adult language. We do a lot of, bad things to our children. So now, when I see a child, I keenly observe what is this child trying to say. Imagine even the smallest child of 2 to 3 months. Somebody says, come, they will go. But there may be others for whom they refuse. They don't go. Even at that age, they have the discernment, the wonderful English word, the discernment, making a judgment whether I should go to this person or not. Through their facial expressions, through their personality, they make a decision whether they need to go or not. And we consider these children stupid, childish, they don't know anything. When a child tries to grasp this and try to break it, we think this is childish, this is foolish. No, this is not foolish. He or she at that age is a scientist. He or she wants to break it to see what happens, with this particular thing, puts into his or her mouth to see how it tastes. So they are great scientists even at that time. But we stupid elders, we never understand their motives, because it's difficult to put ourselves into their shoes. It's too late. We have grown up quite a bit. And therefore, whether, as I said, children, a woman, I tell you, one of the most difficult things I have spent with my wife, for example, 42 years. You ask me, I'm sure you understand your wife. I said, not a bit. Not a bit. Does she understand me? No, not a bit. We have lived together 42 years. Do we understand each other? No. I still grapple with this question. What are her motives? What makes her very happy? What are her greatest concerns? To what extent is she happy with me or not happy? Can any husband say? Can any wife say? Difficult. We don't understand a human being studying for 42 years, living together at least 12 hours every day. No? So to me, I now use one word that Christian tradition very often uses is mystery. To me now, everybody is a mystery. Everything is a mystery. A tree. The other day, somebody told me amazing things about trees. I'm quite inquisitive about trees, plants, flowers, everything in this universe. Birds amaze me. Insects, how they do the ants, the way they, make colonies and the way they work, bees. So I think at this age, I very, very humbly submit, I know nothing. I need to learn everything afresh with a new, fresh outlook towards everything. So I think that makes us very humble. That makes me very humble. And I only wish I have many, many lives to understand at least one thing: a tree, a bird, a human being, a child. So all these learnings, my experiences in different parts of the world, in different universities, as a matter of working with lots of people and institutions, I have come to know that if you have a learning attitude, that makes you humble. And when you are humble, like water, you flow, you flow low. The flower doesn't jump up unless it is forced. It goes, to shallow places. Similarly, when a human becomes humbler, it goes to lower places, and therefore you are able to penetrate through minutest, places into the depths. That's what my life is all about now. See everything with a sense of mystery and with a humble mindset, trying to understand rather saying, I know everything.
Let's speak about, to finish, let's speak about your vision for the future. What is a vision you have for the world, the world can achieve in 25 years? And what insights and suggestions you might give to achieve this vision for the world?
Thank you, Sahil. And that's a very, very insightful question. For the world, let me count only two. There are many, only two. One is that human beings, no matter from where they come, no matter which color they have, that they understand their essence, that by nature, innerly, esoterically, we are all the same. Somebody in Bangladesh, when I was visiting there to speak to some people, had told me that he is very, very concerned that he sees when he walks on the streets, everybody like himself. Everybody like himself. That was worrying him. So I assured him, as per my own understanding, that actually, my friend, that is the case. The situation is like this, as if there is somebody and there are 1,000 mirrors. If you put 1,000 mirrors around somebody, how many persons would you see? 1,000, because the mirrors are 1,000. In 1,000, you see somebody, but the person whose image is projected on this 1,000 mirrors is one. So my sense is that our essential, element, the bottom, the beginning, the seed is the same. So we have same aspirations, same wishes, same pains, same sorrows, and what have you. So my wish is that as the world increases, this is one of my greatest happinesses of modern life. Increasingly, we are seeing people more or less the same way as very, very great nations through their structures, institutional policies have assured or trying to assure that this is the case, that they are seeing people equally, they are providing equal opportunities to different sexes, different ages, different colors, different nations, and what have you. To me, this is a spiritual development. And there are many other nations who are lagging very, very behind on this. They make distinctions based on religion, based on color, based on all sorts of things, gender, huge problem. But many of these developing countries, I think, have had the wisdom, the guts, to structure their societies in a way that these differences are minimized. That's the first thing I see for the future, the way future is progressing. And I think these things will take us to much happier lives. No one feeling I'm left behind because of my color, because of my whatever, gender. The second thing I personally feel is there's, epistemologically speaking, multiple perspectives to understand something. The more disciplines, the more branches of knowledge, the realms of knowledge, become possible, the more we will be able to one thing with those many perspectives. For example, a tree, one could discuss sitting in a room, about the nature of a tree, but seeing it through photographs. I saw one, movie in California that talked about the roots of a tree, how roots travel. It's just amazing. So this was not possible before. There was commonsensical knowledge, but not a scientific way to look at the way roots function. So these realms of knowledge will help us understand humans in myriad ways with different perspectives and will enhance admiration for the creation, to see from multiple angles, not seeing things only from one angle. Look at, for example, religion. We saw religion only through sacred language. Revelational language is what religion is. But today we see sociologically, we look at religion anthropologically, we look at religion psychologically. There are so many angles that give us so many varieties of understandings of how a religious life of a person grows, or religious life of certain people grow, and what happens to them. So rather than just polemically making judgments about a person, who he is or she is, but now we have these multiple dimensions that actually give you a shut-up call, not to make these rubbish statements, judgmental. If somebody, for example, practices a particular ritual, we make fun of him or her today. What a nonsense ritual it is. But sociological, anthropological studies bring meanings to that ritual. And the way that person who participates in that ritual brings out, multiple meanings for that person, as you have for a more sophisticated ritual. So it makes you humbler. So to me, these perspectives, that multiple perspectives to study something, a ruly behavior or a happy behavior, like I talked about happiness, sadness, pleasure, success, all these have multiple dimensions. And modern realms of knowledge enable us to see these perspectives. This is a powerful zone. I urge myself, and my students and the society around to study something, a thing, from as many perspectives as possible. That will enlighten us about everything between the sky and the earth.
Mm.
So that makes us humble as well, that enriches us as well, and that helps us probably become happier for their own values, not because you don't like it or you like it, but for their own sake. You can't mold the entire world according to your liking or unliking. See things the way they are, not the way they should be. I think this is another statement of my life and learning I want to share with our audience, and that is that do not try to judge the people, see the people as they should be, but the way they are. I saw this written on a particular church board in California, in Bay Area. We accept people here as they are, full stop. Meaning, not as they should be. Do not put a condition to accept people in this church, but we accept them the way they are. And I think there is a lesson for all communities, for all human beings, accept people as they are, not as they should be. That's the consciousness I learned from the universe.
Dr. Khaki, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Great pleasure.
Very insightful.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.